Current time is now 7:26 p.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. It's time for Made in Korea with Professor John Demoya from Seoul National University. He joins us in the studio. Professor Demoya, hello to you.
Thanks very much for having me.
Having a hard time eating fruits too?
Yes, and I particularly have noticed the politicization of it in the media, as obviously this has been connected to politics, yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, right? Sweet Marilyn says, come to New Zealand for sweet strawberries. I think it's cheaper to kind of stay in Korea and try to buy strawberries there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you got tasty stuff there. 2002, special year for many Koreans. I was in New York at the time. I still remember 2002 like it was yesterday. I was a sophomore in high school, about to go to my junior year. My summer break was coming through real soon. You, on the other hand...
if I might, and sorry to inspire a little jealousy, I was just finished my first year of graduate school. I had a little bit of time before I started my summer German class, and I arrived on the night of the Italy-Korea game.
The round of 16 match?
Yep.
You arrived on that day?
I arrived on that day. Actually, that night.
In time to watch the match?
Should I go into that right away?
Well,
Sure.
Okay, for our listeners out there, you probably know what we're talking about right now. We're talking about the 2002 Korea-Japan World Cup.
Yeah. Sure, a little background that we can get into.
Yeah, we'll get into it back. I got really excited because this is good part of my my past here. But one thing that I never learned, I just knew that 2002 World Cup was happening. It was going to be co-hosted by Korea and Japan. I don't know the bidding process and what that was like. This was between 1995 and 1996.
Correct. The result would have been announced at the end of May 96 when they said that it would be Korea-Japan.
Okay.
But obviously, as with most of these things, there's a lot of behind the scenes. And my understanding is that the bids were essentially three possible candidates, Mexico, Japan, and Korea. And Korea was interpreted initially as having essentially bid to compete against Japan, given the historical animosity.
Right.
And Mexico, I guess, was seen as a dark horse because I'd have to check this, but I believe they hosted in 86, so it was too soon to do it again.
Mexico,
too soon to do it again. But the problem was with Korea and Japan was, in essence, and this is kind of the background to your question, they ended up compromising and putting them together in what turned out to be the first joint hosting, because it was either put them together or have one very disappointed and kind of huge rancor given Korea and Japan. And so I think, again, that Japan probably had the stronger bid to begin with. I mean, that's the behind the scenes talk, but that coupling them together ultimately is how FIFA and others decided, like, this actually might work out.
Yeah.
Then, of course, to finish really quickly, Korea and Japan. Who gets to be first? Who gets to be second?
I know the story about that.
So that itself. So I remember I was teaching here in '96 as an ESL teacher, and I remember endlessly in March and April students anticipating that it would probably be Korea Japan, but Korea must be first was constant, and ultimately that was the way it was named, but that was not a small issue.
No, it was not.
No, so Mexico ultimately backed out, but yeah.
Even in our news, I don't know if any of our listeners know this, but when we talk about like bilateral summits and trilateral summits, the order in which we put the countries, there are some diplomatic implications in this.
Absolutely.
But us saying Korea-Japan World Cup it's not a diplomatic. That's what it was set on stone. But I heard that in exchange for Korea getting to be named first,
exactly,
Japan was able to host the final of the World Cup.
Exactly, and Korea gets the first game.
Right, exactly. And so
that is the compromise. Yeah,
there's the various compromise.
And I'm sure that was
on.
months of lengthy discussions. That was not an evening and dinner.
But maybe I'll get into this a little bit later on. Guys, remember this talk about the finals, where the finals is taking place. It's taking place in Japan.
Yeah.
Yokohama?
I think Yokohama.
Yokohama was the final. And that was between Brazil and Germany, I believe. But was there a significance in hosting in Asia? Was this the first time that it was being hosted in Asia?
Yes, and a couple quick things. I imagine they looked at the Olympics and how that had impact. 56 Melbourne, but more famously 64 Japan, which was held deliberately in September to avoid the Tokyo heat and was seen as presenting the new Japan 88 Seoul similarly for Korea. So I imagine there was a little bit of that talk about how will this package these two countries in a particular way. And then more importantly, and this turned out to work out, but there was a lot of concern among Europeans in an era that had not yet hit full streaming the way we are now about, oh my God, we're going to have to watch these games at weird hours and this won't fit because obviously, not strictly speaking, but often the World Cup has been dominated by Latin America and Europe, and they have traditionally pitched it to those audiences, and those audiences were not happy about this venue moving to Asia and having to watch the games at weird hours. So millions of dollars worth of television rights, in short.
Yeah, I was probably up at like 2 a.m. watching some of these games. If I
was here.
yeah, exactly. He was here. I was in New York, and I was like, because initially, I remember the craze because, yes, Korea is co-hosting it, but I don't know if there was like high expectations for the team.
No, and that's something we can talk about, right? Exactly. I don't think they knew what happened would happen. No, there's no way they could have known that.
And I'll be perfectly honest with you guys, ladies and gentlemen. I knew as an American, right, then, living in the United States, I had absolutely no interest whatsoever with soccer. Now I call it football, right? But soccer was like...
Same.
I was like, what? But my dad was really big. He's into it. And he goes, we have to watch this. Korea's hosting it, co-hosting it, and they're playing.
And it's a cultural phenomenon, yeah.
I go to school. I go to school, and this kid, I still remember my classmate. He was his name was Ko. He was Burmese, I believe. He was a Burmese American. Big football fan, right?
Yeah.
Every day he would wear like a football kit. He was a Liverpool fan, which later on I'll learn to hate. But he goes, let's bet, right? He goes,
yeah, he wants to put some stakes into it.
Yeah, and he goes, well, the first match is South Korea versus Poland, and I go, I know nothing about
right
how good Poland is, right? And I go, all right, I bet that South Korea will win. And then he goes, how much? Right? He goes, $20. They end up winning.
Yeah, they ended up beating Poland and Portugal and tying the U.S. in that round.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think anyone anticipated going in that they would do that well.
Yeah, people forget Poland is actually pretty good. The U.S., believe it or not, they're actually a really good team.
Well, certainly at that time.
Even now, actually. They're always in like the top, I believe the FIFA ranking.
Right. I don't follow the
they
rankings.
might be like top 10 or something like that. They're actually
They don't always perform well, but in the rankings,
they're ranked very high.
Yes.
Portugal had some of the world-class players like Luis Figo.
I was going to say, and that was a team that was seen afterwards as underperforming, but prior to that cup, they were seen as possibly a candidate for advancing very far.
Yeah, exactly.
So Korea beating them was an upset.
Yeah, and so Korea ends up winning that group with 2 wins and a draw.
Just to throw it in so we don't forget, not that FIFA planned this, but Japan also qualified to the round of 16. So FIFA was very happy because they can't arrange these things, but they're happy when the host countries advance because it means more audiences, more TV dollars.
Yeah, so I ended up winning $60 on the group stages because it was $20 for the Poland game. U.S. game was draw, so it was a push.
Yes,
and then it doubled up, and then Poland game, it was a $40 bet. Ended up winning that. I'm sorry, Portugal match.
Yeah.
And then that kid
Korea
was
2-0 and 1. Yeah.
And he was like, what in the world is going on here?
No, and I have to admit too, I had not yet come, but I had previously taught English in Korea, so like you, I had some interest in Korea, and I'm going to the cup, but I had no expectation that I would arrive and they would still be active and ultimately very active.
Remember, I know very little about soccer. Now they go on to the round of 16.
Yep.
They're playing against Italy.
Exactly.
A powerhouse.
A powerhouse which at that time had won 3, now has won 4, traditionally a major player.
Yeah. And that, I believe, was the first World Cup by my favorite football player, Gianluigi Buffon, who's the goalkeeper. And great match.
Who was to redeem himself 4 years later, but not then.
Right, exactly. Not then.
Yes.
Korea was not supposed to win this match.
No, they were not supposed to win this match.
Italy was up 1-0. In the first time.
To give you the context, that's when I arrived at Incheon and was riding the bus, and everyone on the bus was depressed. And I got to Gangnam, and something happened.
They tied.
They tied it, and I was looking for my friend who I was staying with amidst several 100,000 people going Tae Hanmin Cook, and I was like, what is going on here?
It must have been quite a scene for you.
Oh, it was incredible. I had not been back since '96. It was my first time back in 6 years, and I did ultimately find my friend, but I was trying to find my friend in Gangnam among thousands of people, and they were all screaming. At that time, I had very little Korean. I was like, something good happened.
Yeah, something good did happen because that last minute goal, I believe it was like the 88th minute.
It was definitely late,
yeah,
which
very
took them
late.
to extra time. Yeah,
overtime, golden goal by An Jung-hwan, who earlier had missed a penalty.
Okay, that I'd forgotten. Okay,
right. So everyone's like, "Oh my goodness," and a golden goal sends them to the next round. Afterwards, An Jung-hwan, who was playing for an Italian team in Perugia, they released him.
Okay. And then the other quick context, if people know this, and if they don't, it's a great story, is that the Italians had previously once been upset in '66 in the UK.
Was that North Korea?
By North Korea.
Yeah.
So in the Italian newspapers, they were all like, A, we're incredibly embarrassed, and B, it's another Korea.
So if you...
we've lost to Korea again, just the other Korea.
And I still remember at that match, the Korea-Italy match, because the fans would come out and they would have like these big signs up.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And one of the signs said, again, 1966.
Okay. Which
so
someone knew the history. Someone knew the history.
Yeah, obviously saying we want a repeat of that. It was North Korea then, but we want a repeat of that history. But there was a lot of controversies with the Italian game.
Oh, yeah. The questions, and this fits into the earlier questions about Asia. Certainly afterwards, questions about the refereeing, questions about... Korea has for a long time had a reputation in Asia for being a good team, but very physical. There were questions about whether they were allowed in their home context to take that up a notch or two.
Did they get a home field advantage?
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
And certainly the Italians were free to say this afterwards, and the Spaniards would say this in the next round.
And so the red card that was given,
yes.
right... by I believe his name was the referee's name was something Moreno, I think was what it was. That red card is right now in the Suwon Seoul World Cup Stadium Hall of Fame museum.
I did not know that, but that's wonderful.
It's in the museum, that red card, and that referee, he actually did not end up having a very good life afterwards.
The controversy has followed.
But for a completely different reason.
Okay.
He was actually arrested for smuggling drugs in an airport, and he's still in prison right now.
One other quick context before we jump ahead to the next round. If you've ever seen the Cholima Chukudan, the documentary about the '66 North Korean team, they obviously were not expected to beat the Italians, and when they were interviewed about how they were housed for the next round, they apparently were put in a Catholic, either a monastery or facility, because that's where the Italians would have gone, and the North Korean players were like, wow, so they took us to this place with all these objects on the wall, and obviously they were referring to... So again, they were not neither Korea was expected to advance. But yes, 2002, all kinds of questions subsequently about the refereeing and the home crowd advantage. How far was that taken?
We got a bunch of our listeners having different memories of the 2002 World Cup. Made it up, who's in the UK, he's in London. I remember watching England versus Brazil quarterfinals at like 7 a.m. or something, then having to go back to work with clinical depression after we lost.
I was going to say, I don't remember the game, except I want to say that maybe Beckham scored early, like on a and then Brazil obviously came back.
Was that the one where David Seaman was like, the goalkeeper there was looking at, I think was like waving at it like a family member or something like that, and then let a goal in? Was that what that was?
Okay, I obviously at this point I was invested in Korea. Yeah,
I have no interest in it. So
sure,
they end up beating controversially
Italy.
They beat Italy, and so now I'm up $80 now. Spain
in the round of 8. Yeah,
surely South Korea cannot beat Spain.
Right. And this, if my memory serves, was on a weekend. I believe it was a Saturday. I'd have to check, but what I remember was watching the game in Gangnam on a big screen in a store window, and the crowd was so into it that if you know Gangnam Dairo, we're outside the station leading up to Kyobo, like 4 lanes, the crowd was basically occupying the street, and when a bus came along, a policeman nicely came along and said, "Come like could you let the bus through?" Right. And that's when I realized this is out of hand, but it's all good. Like the Korean crowd was peaceful. There were millions of people. And you know how Seoul, when people come in from Gyeonggi-do, it was not 10 million that day. It felt like 15, 17 million, everyone wearing a red shirt.
Right, be the Reds.
Yeah, be the Reds, which I still have one somewhere.
I don't know where mine went, but it was probably Saturday, because I remember it was Friday night. My dad and I, my aunt and her husband, we all went to Flushing, New York.
Sure. Yeah.
Where
I
the
can get.
now it's
Chinatown.
Now it's Chinatown
Exactly.
now,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it was Koreatown
Sure.
back before. And we went to a restaurant that was hosting it, and so they had a wedding hall, and they were hosting this at a wedding hall on a big screen.
Yeah, perfect venue.
And so we all had to wait in line just to get there.
Okay.
So I remember it was after school. It was a Friday night. We all decided to go to Flushing. We're waiting in line for hours just to get a seat. And because I didn't go to school the next day. It was Saturday, so you're right. It was a Saturday
because I remember
match.
it being roughly midday or early Saturday afternoon Seoul time.
0-0.
Yep, it went pretty late. Yeah.
Final regulation time, overtime, 0-0. There was a goal that was disallowed.
Okay.
By Spain. We thought that Spain had scored. They go into penalty. Iker Casillas, who ends up being one of the finest goalkeepers in Spanish history. He is the goalkeeper. South Korea wins in penalty.
And becomes the first Asian team to, or actually, I think even at that time, the first team that's non-European or South American to get that far.
I remember it was...
Turkey will also at that time, same cup, make it that far. But previously it had always been European teams and the big players from South America.
I remember it was like 5 a.m. in New York, and we were
that
all
fits because
going
it was
wild.
late. Yeah, because it fits because it was late afternoon in Seoul. Right?
Yeah. And so we're going wild now. Hong Myung-bo gets that final penalty.
Yeah.
They convert all their penalties. Joaquin, I believe, was the one that missed. But you go into the Germany game, right? And this is, if you beat
now the
Germany...
expectation is the other way.
Yeah,
exactly,
if Germany, if they beat Germany, they're going to the World Cup. And I don't know if this was true, but they were saying if Korea wins, right, and they go to the final, that they should move the final to Seoul World Cup Stadium.
I had not heard that, but I believe that probably existed at the popular level, but that was not going to happen. Yeah.
That was not going to happen because there was all these agreements in place. And when the Germany match, what was it like at the scene when you were in Korea?
Yeah, sure. I did, as at that point, I was heavily invested, and you can imagine. I went up to Cheongno with some friends where you do the thing where you get the grilled meat, and you sit at the table, and the guy's got the big screen at the restaurant, and we all have the Be the Reds t-shirts, the laid up things around our necks, and yes, I had the temporary I love hitting tattoo. And there are pictures of this somewhere, as one of your production people asked me, but they have never made the internet, and they will never be seen publicly.
By the way, Gus Hiddink is a hero, national hero, but before the World Cup, his nickname was Odebang, because South Korea kept on losing to like teams
that they should not have lost.
Yeah, like 5-0 was all the results they were getting.
But so we did that, and we had expectations, but you could see over time that the Germans, I think, were tougher, were more resistant to the, dealing with the crowd and things like that. And then as it got later and later in that game, it felt more and more opposite of the previous games, that, okay, later and 0-0 is good for the Germans. And if you know the famous line, I've forgotten who said it, but it's a British guy, but he was once asked to define football, and he said it's a game where people run around for 90 minutes and nothing much happens, but in the end, Germany wins. and it's not untrue for much of the second half of the 20th century, given the Germans in 54, 74, and 90. They're very efficient.
Germany won. Oliver Kahn was the goalkeeper for Germany. I believe Michael Ballack was the one that scored, and it was an unfortunate goal because Yoon Jae, who was the goalkeeper at the time, had blocked the.
I was going to say it was a rebound or something.
It was a rebound.
Yeah, I do remember that. Okay,
and that was that, and then that was the end of the dream, right? But they still had the third, fourth match.
Yeah, and I'll say this right before we get there. The aftermath from Cheongmo getting back to where I was staying in the south part of Seoul, people were actually pretty relaxed. And what I just remember was massive kind of post-celebration, like, okay, we lost, it took me, game probably ended sometime 9, 10 p.m., but evening. I probably didn't get home till 2 or 3 a.m. because the subways were packed. So you essentially got to the station, hung out with people chatting, and perhaps there's some alcohol involved, but it took a long time to get home, but no one really seemed to mind. And if I remember correctly, the government gave a day or two holiday afterwards because the nation had been...
Really?
I want to say at least a day, because it had been such a national crazy party for like the last 8 or 10 days that they were like, okay, everybody, like take one.
Let me tell you how some people benefited from all of this. My aunt, who has been working at the Samsung Medical Center for 30 plus years. She was one of the first nurses to work.
Oh, cool.
And she's probably going to retire in like 2 years or something like that. She said she took a couple of weeks off, right? I was like, how can you take a couple of weeks off? And she said, I made as many kimbaps as possible.
Oh, smart.
Went to Seoul City Hall.
Yeah.
and sold kimbaps for 2001 a roll, which was considered at the time a little bit high.
Yeah. For 2002, yeah.
She made more money during the World Cup than she would have made in her job.
Yeah, and I'll say one of the other fun things as we get to the final and sort of bigger implications is that just seeing, because obviously a lot of people who previously had not come to Asia came for either Tokyo or here or both, and I got to see what I remember most, memory of course vague over 20 years later, but was seeing a bunch of Brazilians in a subway car going like Brazil, and then a bunch of Ajima at the other end of the subway car standing up and going like Te Hamingok. And I was sitting there going, Brazilians versus Ajima. What a cultural conflict here.
You can't beat.
And they weren't angry. It was just exactly. I was just sitting here watching this, going, whatever this is cool.
We all know the results of this. They ended up finishing 4th place.
Yeah, they lost to Turkey in the consolation game.
But what impact did this have in Korea, Japan, and the region?
Sure. I think immediately, and there are different figures about this, but definitely an economic impact that can generally be regarded as positive. I think particularly in terms of the hosting and the initial concerns about TV and people not watching, obviously challenged a lot, and obviously that is, I don't know if FIFA planned this, but you think about how the NBA used 92 Barcelona to expand the NBA's market. I'm sure you could argue that the successful hosting and then what happened with the most recent World Cup being moved to the Middle East, that this was part of FIFA's, wow, we really need to globalize. So then beyond the economics, Korea and Japan both have very successful leagues. The expansion of even women's football, where Japan will win the 2011 Olympics. Long story short, Korea has not, unfortunately, gotten back to the round of 4, and Koreans regularly bring this up. But they do regularly qualify, Japan regularly qualifies, and Korea at least certainly often makes the round of 16.
I would say,
so what I mean is they've established a much more stable presence than they had previously.
Yeah, and I think the big thing that happened was what they call Park Ji-sung's kids. And so 2002, this was when Park Ji-sung that's where he kind of rose to fame.
Sure.
And all the kids started playing football afterwards.
And now there are plenty of Koreans in Premier League and other places where they are placed where they were not previously.
Right, exactly. And so that really paved the way for, I think, the Korean football market here. I know there's still controversies about, home team advantages that the South Korea had gotten, especially in the...
this comes up with any time I talk with European colleagues about this.
Italy and the Spain matches, and I'm not going to deny that. Which, for a moment, when you're talking about Barcelona basketball, I was thinking like the time that the NBA had allegedly gave the Knicks Patrick Ewing on that draft.
Well, if you remember, the envelope sticks to the wheel in a certain way that believe me, that conspiracy theory is still out there.
In order to kind of generate
80
I think it was 84, 83 or
85,
something like that. Yeah, out of Georgetown, right? But it's been, the reason why we cover this is because I think it was end of May, the last week of May.
End of May into June, because I remember that's exactly why I came late, was because I had to finish up my second semester.
And since then, there's always, I don't know how the craze was, because then you were in 96, you were in Korea.
Yeah.
Were you there for the 98 World Cup, the France World Cup?
No, I was not.
Because I want to know, how the scene was before 2002.
If I can give you that weirdness of it too, I was working in a language school in New Jersey, and the owner was French. And of course, you remember famously, it was the France-Brazil final
and
where
France
the French
destroyed them.
So I remember my boss, who had we had lots of Brazilian clients, going around to all of them saying, "You played very well, valiantly," and then he closed the door and you hear him going, "Woo!" But he handled it really well in public. He kept telling all of our clients who were probably paying him lots of money, "Oh, you played very well. It's such an upset, such a tragedy."
I remember, what was it? There was the World Cup in was it not the recent World Cup, the one before that, where South Korea beat Germany. And this upset.
Yeah, so this would have been
2018. And then Mexico was able to qualify for the next round.
Yeah.
And then I heard that there was some Korean tourists who were in Mexico at the time.
Okay.
And just treated all the restaurants
because they just did them a good fit. Yeah, exactly.
Which is why you can argue, I know there's a lot of Americans who go, their football is the most popular, but you can't beat soccer football.
I know. Only to compliment that to you, and the last comment from my part on this is exactly, you have to watch it outside the U.S. Because I also was, and then the minute I experienced 2002, now I'm into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Professor Demoya, fun talk here, talking about the 2000 World Cup, Korea-Japan World Cup. Have a safe rest of the week, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks very much.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application, or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.